What makes combat feel good in video games? Why do we collectively perceive some games as having amazing combat, while others not so much? What are the specific aspects of fighting enemies in video games that make our brains produce those happy juices? Well, let's dive in and cook up the secret recipe for a juicy, satisfying combat that everyone will love. Hello, and since I'm uploading this video in less than a year after the previous one, welcome back to my channel. In the last devlog, we kicked off my biggest personal project ever, Project Valas. It's a dark fantasy game with Souls-like elements, inspired by master painters, award-winning movies, soul-touching music, and, believe it or not, a particularly captivating TikTok trend. I can't help but wonder now how The Lord of the Rings would look like if Tolkien had a smartphone and drew inspiration from TikTok. In this devlog, we'll tackle what I believe is the most important gameplay element, aside from rolling through barrels of course, the combat system for Valas. As I mentioned in the first devlog, combat in Project Valas will revolve around hand-to-hand sword fighting with magical elements. While my partner in crime, Julia, works on the magic system, stay tuned for an upcoming devlog on that, I've been focusing on designing the sword fighting. But how do we get it right? Some of our main inspirations for combat are games like Ghost of Tsushima, Sekiro, God of War, and of course the Elden Ring. What do these games have in common that makes their combat feel so good? Let's start with the general direction for combat in such games. One of the first questions you have to answer as a designer here is how authentic the combat system should be compared to real-life scenarios. Japanese martial arts like Kenjutsu and Kendo inspired combat in games like Ghost of Tsushima and Sekiro, with their realistic katana techniques and stances. Similarly, Chinese martial arts and European fencing offer rich inspiration for dynamic sword fighting. I'm currently doing my own research on these topics, and if you're interested, I might make a video where I talk about these topics with one of my friends that is a game dev expert in sword fighting techniques. And if you have some interesting facts about those techniques, please let me know in the comments section. For Valas, we are drawing from HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts. HEMA focuses on martial arts from the late Middle Ages to the Renaissance. While authentic combat techniques can enhance the sword fighting fantasy and base rules for parrying and riposting, AAA games often balance authenticity with fun. So we will take inspiration from HEMA, but we're not afraid to sacrifice authenticity for more enjoyable gamey experience. Another important factor that before mentioned titles nailed is the general pace and flow of the combat, meaning how long do you usually fight a singular enemy, and more importantly, how does the challenge and difficulty of a fight vary throughout a singular combat encounter? You see, to keep your players engaged and focus on the game experience, as a designer you have to do everything you can to put your player into the flow state. You know how sometimes you enjoy an activity so much that time flies by without you even noticing? The rest of the world just falls away, and all you're thinking about is what you're currently doing. For example, reading a really interesting book, playing tennis, or fighting Malenia Blade of Mikola for the 50th time.
I am Malenia, Blade of Mikola.
This state of focus, leisure and enjoyment is generally referred to as the flow state, and had been the subject of psychological studies by, for example, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Okay, 1 second.
Mihai, Csikszentmihalyi.
Well, by this guy. As a designer, your way of putting player into this state is by carefully tweaking the challenge of the game and the skills required to tackle this challenge. By the way, together with Julia, we will dive deeper into the principles of game design and combat mechanics for general AAA games in one of the upcoming videos. And who knows, maybe we'll even make it into a series about AAA games design principles. If you're interested, let us know in the comments or subscribe to the channel to stay updated. For now, let's focus on the combat in Valas. With the general approach for authenticity set, and after planning the combat pacing and timings, it was time to implement our ideas into the game. I started by implementing light and heavy attacks in the gameplay ability system. For this, I actually avoided mix ammo, as even this initial combat prototype needed higher quality animations. I purchased a fitting animation set for $70. Since we might add more weapons later on, I also set up a base for the weapon system, holding attack animations within the weapon item that player uses. To make my life easier here, Julia implemented a breakthrough in game dev technology, the swine test system.
So basically how it works is whenever Raffle makes a mistake and something that should work doesn't work, it spawns a pig on the screen. The purpose of this is first of all to notify Raffle about an apparent and probably easy to avoid in the first place mistake that he made, and second of all to notify me that Raffle made an apparent and probably easy to avoid in the first place mistake so I can have a laugh. I also added a pig counter so we can track who introduces more bugs. The person with the higher number of pigs at the end of the week buys cocktails at our favorite cocktail bar, also conveniently named Valas.
With attack animations tied to the weapon item, I added a attack combo system. This means different attack animations will play if player continues attacking in a sequence. Here I added another hugely important system into the game, the input buffering system. You probably noticed this while playing other games as well. When you are in the middle of an intense fight, you generally don't really have to worry about when to press the attack button in regards to the attack animation to follow up with another attack in a combo. Now, the game engine needs to know when to play the attack animation, and if you simply tell it to play it after a player pressed the attack button, it will do just that, meaning it will stop whatever attack animation is currently playing and start playing the new one. And obviously, this would lead to player not having really fun experience and me having more pigs on the swine system table. To change that, I set it up so that if you press the attack button while an attack animation is being already played, the system will remember that you wanted to lead with the next attack and play it when the current animation is finished. Later on, I will tweak this system to decide which actions can cancel current attack animations, like dodging or rolling mid-attack. Now it was time to start answering design questions about the required distances and values of the attacks in regards to the enemy on the screen. In my day job as a AAA game designer, I mostly focus on enemies design, so I couldn't help myself and I spent some time researching and kickstarting the direction for enemies design in Project Valas. I will dedicate one of the upcoming devlogs to this topic, but for now, the direction is that most enemies will be monstrous creatures of similar scale to the player, with some larger ones and custom-sized bosses. Having a base for light attacks and heavy attacks in the game, now it was time to tackle another hugely important aspect of what makes combat feel good in games, which is the design direction of attack animations. See, generally, when you play a game with good melee combat, there is some magic happening after you press the attack button. It's not just simply playing the attack animation and checking if you hit the enemy. Games such as Ghost of Tsushima or Sekiro have a lot of intricate systems that live between player pressing the button and the sword hitting the enemy. As a combat designer, you have to decide on how your character will behave with their weapon, but also how they will move on their feet while performing these actions. To achieve the dynamic but still grounded feel in animation I'm going for, I selected attack animations that have some movement in them, meaning that the character will physically move forward when performing the attack, instead of just standing in place. It is also important to select animations with the most dynamic feet positioning as the first attack in the combo. This is mainly because such animations are warpable. But what does it mean? Warping involves adding systems on top of your animations, like target locking and motion warping. Target locking is a system most players are already familiar with. In many games that feature sword melee combat, you can press a specific button to lock onto the enemy, and the main character will keep their rotation facing the enemy, having it closer to the center of the screen at all times. This type of system is called hard locking, and it's a very clear and mechanical way of focusing on the enemy. There is another type of locking as well, soft locking, which means that the game itself will decide to slightly alter the camera and sometimes even play rotation to focus on the closest enemy in combat, without any specific player input to lock. For now, I implemented the hard locking system into the game, adding some tweakable parameters here, like what percentage of the screen player character takes, compared to how much screen does the enemy take. The hardlock system already helps with landing your attacks directly on the enemy without having to carefully rotate your character to land a hit, but it doesn't yet make the base of attack system enjoyable. For that, I will implement the second animation system I mentioned, the motion warping system. This basically means that whenever the player moves during the attack, the game performs some cheating behind the scenes and moves the player character to a perfect spot and also rotates the character in a perfect way to land a hit. There is a special plugin in Unreal Engine that allows you to implement it in the animation montages of your attacks. I tweaked the parameters of warping to achieve this snappy feeling of attacks, but without turning our brave knight into a Batman.
Make you dead.
Later on, we will also use motion warping in the setup of the attacks of my enemies, so they also gain some behind-the-scenes magic advantage in combat. By the way, I cannot stress enough how important motion warping system is in any game that has melee combat. I will give you a tip here.
That's what she said.
If you will be recruiting for a game design position and you will be given a task to implement part of melee combat, or maybe you have a project to show during recruitment, please implement this part of the system as well. Throughout my career, I reviewed some of such applications or portfolios, and usually having systems like that immediately puts you above some other less experienced candidates. With light and heavy attacks set, I added unconventional attacks triggered after rolling or dodging back, cleared some bugs and ended this week of Valas development. Since my side of the swine system board got overpopulated with pigs, it was my duty to buy cocktails in the Valas bar, where we also discussed our plans for the next week of development. And that's it for this devlog. To summarize, in 1 month and 2 weeks, we've achieved a state where the player can attack, lock onto enemies, and warp animations, with combat and magic system designs in progress, with all the other stuff mentioned in the first devlog implemented. So far, we've spent $230 on Project Valas. By the way, I would like to thank you all for an amazing support after the last devlog, especially in the comments section. In the next devlog, we will tackle a hugely important topic for this project, which is the movement system and the base for player abilities. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye!